Hello, everyone. Thank you for your attendance. Sorry for a minute delay. There were some technical issues. When you least expect it happens, right? I'll just wait 30 seconds more and then I think we are good to start. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Aisha Vyas, and over the next hour, we are going to talk about modernization in a way that is grounded in reality, not aspiration, not theory, not one day when everything is perfect, but reality as it exists inside the organizations right now. Because most organizations are in the same place. They know they need to modernize, they know migration is inevitable, they know technical debt is real, but they're also living with real constraints. Budgets, risk, compliance, operational continuity, and people. And in the middle of all that complexity, there is one group that almost always gets forgotten during long modernization journeys: the users, the citizens, the customers, the employees. Because they don't experience roadmaps. What they experience is forms. And today, what happens we are about to see what happens when we decide that experience should not have to wait. Quick housekeeping note, this session is being recorded and will be shared after the webinar. With that, let's get started. Again, I'm Mahisha Vyas, and I'm a strategic solution architect at 4Point. I have been with 4Point for about 5 years, working closely with organizations that rely on digital forms and complex workflows. My role focuses on driving innovation in how forms are designed, delivered, and experienced, particularly when AI can help reduce friction, improve accuracy, and support modernization without disrupting existing systems. A core part of my work is also centered on accessibility, making sure the way people interact with forms works across different abilities and devices. And outside of work, I'm a big fan of mysteries, especially Agatha Christie. I've always enjoyed how Poirot untangles a complicated web of perspectives and turns it into something that finally makes sense. And you are welcome to drop questions in the chat as we go. I won't stop to answer them during the presentation. We'll save all the questions for the end. So kindly feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Let's start with something we all acknowledge, but don't always articulate clearly. It's migration is hard, and it's not hard because organizations are resistant to change. It's hard because systems carry history. When we talk about complex legacy architecture, we are not talking about one outdated system. We are talking about years, sometimes decades of accumulated decisions, integrations, and adaptations. A single form might connect to eligibility systems, case management tools, document repositories, audit workflows, notification engines, external partners, whatnot, right? That form didn't become complex overnight. It became complex because it simply had to. Now, layer onto that the reality of hundreds of forms with embedded logic. These aren't static PDFs, they contain conditional rules, dependencies, field level validations, exceptions that exist for historical or regulatory reasons. Rebuilding that logic requires understanding not just what the form does, but why it does it. Then there are regulatory and compliance constraints. In many environments, especially government and regulated industries, the output document is not negotiable. It must look exactly as approved. Fonts, layout, wording, all logged. So, modernization isn't just make it easier, it's make it easier without changing anything that legally matters. Now, add multiple downstream integrations into this mix. And suddenly, every change becomes a chain reaction. And that's why migration carries a high risk of disruption. Forms are often treated mission critical because they enable benefits, they enable services, they enable onboarding, payments, and eligibility. Breaking them is not just an inconvenience, it's a service failure, which is why migration takes time. It is not a single activity, it's a sequence of interdependent steps like budgeting, planning, architecture, development, testing, and then finally rollout. Each phase depends on the one before it, and each introduces its own risk and complexity. And that is exactly why modernization so often gets postponed. Now, let's talk about a part that rarely shows up on architecture diagrams, which is too obvious people. Change friction is real, and most teams today are already navigating through constant change. They are adjusting to new security requirements, adopting new tools, adapting to new processes, and keeping up with ever evolving compliance checks, often all at the same time. So, when another major transformation is introduced, even a positive one, the first reaction is often exhaustion, not excitement. Then there is the learning curve. New platforms don't just require training, they require unlearning old habits, rebuilding confidence, and navigating mistakes during transition. Now let's talk about transition. Transition period comes at a cost. Productivity dips as people adjust. Support tickets increase as questions and issues surface. And operational friction rises as teams navigate new ways of working. Then there is also fear, particularly when AI enters the conversation. Not fear of technology, but fear of uncertainty. What does this mean for my role? Am I expected to become an AI expert? Will this slow me down before it helps me? Another challenge is simple and ambiguity. Many organizations have AI tools available to them, but employees don't know where they fit. They don't know when to use them, and they don't know whether to trust them. So, what happens? Adoption stalls. Not because people don't care, they clearly do, but because the tool doesn't belong anywhere in their workflow. And finally, there is muscle memory. People rely on familiar processes, even the bad ones, because they are predictable. But change threatens that predictability. And when migration touches IT, compliance, operations, and service teams, all at once, alignment alone can slow everything down. And this is why change management is often the hardest part of the modernization. While we have established that change is hard, we need to now understand how outdated systems are not just inefficient, they are financially draining. A significant portion of IT budget goes towards maintaining legacy systems rather than investing in innovation. That means money is being spent simply to keep things running. Resources go into patching systems, supporting aging platforms, and constantly maintaining compatibility just to preserve the status quo, not to improve the experience, not to enable growth, and not to reduce friction. Beyond direct maintenance, there are also hidden costs, manual workarounds, shadow processes, duplicate effort. And legacy systems often require specialized skills that are harder to find and even more expensive to retain. As a result, organizations they end up paying a premium simply to remain operational. Now, this slide is about time and how easily it disappears. Outdated systems lead to productivity loss as employees spend hours every week re entering data, correcting errors, and clarifying incomplete submissions. This loss doesn't show up as a single incident, it shows up as a constant friction. And because outdated systems rely heavily on manual processes, error rates increase. Not because people are careless, but it is because the system design invites mistake. Fragmented data slows decision making, and when teams don't trust the data, they hesitate. When they hesitate, processes slow. And when processes slow down, service quality suffers. Outdated systems also increase risk. Older platforms often can't keep pace with the modern security expectations, and patching becomes difficult, upgrading becomes too risky. So, when data capture is inconsistent, managing compliance becomes significantly more complex. Missing information, incorrect formats, incomplete records, introduce exceptions and manual review, increasing audit effort and regulatory exposure over the time. While compliance issues may start as operational friction, their impact goes beyond the cost. They ultimately erode trust. Also, legacy systems, they don't scale well. Solutions that work at low volume often fail as demand grows. More users and channels introduce complexity and coordination challenges. Integration issues lead to silos. In response, teams end up creating isolated fixes instead of scalable solutions. And when systems can't adapt quickly, Organizations miss opportunities, not because they don't see them, but because acting is too difficult. Slowly, each new group or channel increases variation and exposes limitation that weren't apparent at a smaller scale. And as complexity grows, integration challenges become more pronounced. The systems that were once compatible start to diverge. Teams spend more time managing handoffs and data gaps than innovating. Innovation slows down, not for the lack of ideas, but due to missing shared foundations. Teams resort to quick fixes for immediate problems rather than building lasting, scalable solutions. When systems lag behind, opportunities are missed simply because taking action, again, is too demanding. Outdated systems also frustrate employees. When tools push back on people every day, even small tasks become harder than they need to be. And over time, engagement drops, retention becomes more difficult, and morale starts to suffer as teams spend more energy working around system than doing any meaningful work. Now, customers feel the impact as well, often before the organization does. When systems are slow or fragmented, customers experience longer response time, avoidable errors, repeated follow ups as issues are corrected after submission. What should be a single interaction now turns into multiple touch points, increasing frustration and effort on their side. From the customer's perspective, these breakdowns aren't seen as technical limitations or system constraints. They aren't visible as backend issues or legacy challenges. Customers don't differentiate between system limitations and organizational competence. They simply experience friction in the service they receive. And over time, that friction shapes perception. It affects confidence, satisfaction, and willingness to engage, even when the underlying intent and effort from the organization are strong. When we talk about outdated systems, we often frame the problem as technology issue, like old platforms, legacy architecture, unsupported versions. But what I want to focus on here is something more fundamental. Outdated systems don't fail first at processing, they fail first at data capture. And once data capture goes wrong, everything downstream inherits that failure. Let's start with how this actually shows up in real life. In an outdated system, data capture is usually designed around systems need, not the human's reality. The form assumes the user understands internal terminology. It assumes they know exactly what a field means. It assumes they will read the instructions carefully, interpret them correctly, and then apply them consistently. Now, that's a huge assumption because what happens is instead this users hesitate, they guess, they skip fields they don't understand, they enter information in format that makes sense to them, but not the format that system expects. And this is precisely how error rates climb. Not because users are careless, but because the system is asking humans to behave like structured databases. And when there is no real time validation, no immediate feedback that says, this doesn't look right, errors quietly slip through. An email address is missing a character, a date is entered in a wrong format, an ID number is missing a digit. Each one looks small in isolation, but when we add them up, it becomes expensive. Now, layer in incomplete and missing information. Outdated forms often allow users to move forward without enforcing any logic. If someone answers yes to a question that should trigger additional fields, those fields may not appear clearly or not at all. Instructions might exist, but they are separated from field itself. Sometimes they are on another page. Sometimes they are in a separate PDF. So obviously, users miss them. And when required information is missing, the organization doesn't just reject the submission, it starts a loop. Someone has to review it, someone has to contact the user has to come back, reopen the form, re enter the information. And then another review happens. This back and forth consumes time on both sides, affecting customers and the organization alike. Now let's talk about format. Outdated systems often collect data in a way that are fundamentally incompatible with automation. Information arrives as PDFs, scans, email attachments, sometimes handwritten, sometimes low resolution, and sometimes partially legible. At this point, the system can't use the data. It can only store it. So what happens? Humans step in, they manually rekey information, they interpret handwriting, they decide where a piece of information belongs. And every time a human has to interpret data, consistency is lost. This is where data quality really starts to erode. Then comes slow manual processing because the data isn't clean at the point of capture, it has to be cleaned later. This means now staff spends time verifying, correcting, normalizing, and reconciling information before it's usable. And that means approvals slow down. Onboarding now takes longer. Benefits processing backs up, claims stall. This is the scenario when organization becomes reactive instead of being efficient. And finally, there's experience impact. Users feel confused and frustrated. Employees feel they are constantly fixing preventable issues. Frustration increase, not because anyone is doing a bad job, but because the system is creating unnecessary friction at every step. So when we say outdated systems affect data capture, what we really mean is this. They force humans to do the work system should be doing for them. They delay clarity until it's too late, and they simply turn a simple act of providing information into a multi-step correction process. Now, I want to shift from describing the problem to explaining why effective data capture is one of the most powerful levers an organization can pull. And instead of doing this through a diagram or abstractions, I'm going to walk through it as a story. Imagine a user, it could be a citizen, customer, or an employee sitting down to complete a form. And let's be realistic. They don't start with excitement. They start with a goal. I need to submit this. I need to get this done. I need to move forward. So they open the form. At this moment, effective data capture does one of the two things. It either builds confidence or it introduces doubt. If form asks for information in a way that feels clear, conversational, and supportive, people relax. They move forward with confidence. They trust that they are doing the right thing. But when a form asks for something unclear, a term they don't recognize, or a format they are unsure about, something subtle changes. People pause. They reread the question. They scroll back to look for instructions. Sometimes they open another tab to search for help. And eventually, they make their best guess. And that guess is often where things start to break down. On its own, a single guess doesn't seem quite, significant, but at scale, it adds up very quickly. Let's take a simple scenario, a realistic one. Um, Imagine an organization that processes about 100 submissions a month. And across those submissions, they are capturing about 5,000 individual data entries. Even if 5% of those entries contain errors, which is not unusual in manual or poorly guided data capture, that's about 250 data errors every month. Now let's connect that to the cost. The average cost to identify, correct, and process a single data entry error typically falls somewhere between $50 to $150. That includes review time, follow-ups, rework, and downstream delays. When you multiply those 250 errors with the cost, they translate to about $12,000 to $37,000 every single month, just to correct preventable issues at that point of capture. And those costs aren't abstract. Each error represents extra effort. Someone has to review the submission, someone has to clarify what was meant. In many cases, the user has to be contacted, asked to resubmit, or provide additional information. What started as a moment of uncertainty becomes a cycle of rework. Now let's zoom out because that example is small compared to what many large organizations are dealing with. We have worked with environments where tens of millions of forms are completed every year. In one case, roughly 38 million forms annually. Even if we assume a best case scenario, that is 1% error rate, which is optimistic for most organizations, that still translates to hundreds of thousands of errors every year. And when you multiply each of those by the cost, the financial impact doesn't stay in thousands. It quickly moves into millions of dollars annually. Before you even factor in opportunity cost, delayed services, or customer dissatisfaction cost. This is why effective data capture matters so much, because it's designed to prevent that moment of uncertainty in the first place. It doesn't wait until the data reaches back office to identify a problem. Instead, it intervenes at the moment of entry, validating inputs, clarifying intent, and guiding the user forward before uncertainty turns into an error. Now let's follow that same submission beyond the form itself, because the real value of effective data capture isn't just at the front end. It shows up in everything that happens next. When data capture is uh, correct, first time, it flows. There is no pause for clarification, no manual correction, no back and forth emails or follow up calls. Approvals move faster because reviewers they trust what they are seeing. And automation works as intended because the data is structured. Decisions happen sooner because information is complete, and that efficiency compounds. Imagine one clean submission saves minutes, 100 saves hours, thousands save weeks of effort across an organization and significantly reduce avoidable operational cost. The human impact matters just as much. For users, effective data capture removes uncertainty. They don't stop to wonder, did I do this right? Or worry about rejection or delays. They complete the task and move on. For employees, it removes daily frustration. Instead of spending time correcting preventable mistakes, they now can focus on meaningful work, evaluating, deciding, and helping. And for the organizations, it restores confidence in the process. Effective data capture becomes the foundation for reliable analytics, predictable service levels, scalable operations, and stronger compliance confidence. And this is the most important point. Once the data is captured, you can't fully undo the impact. Yes, you can clean it, you can normalize it, you can patch it, but you can't recover the intent, confidence, or clarity that was lost at the moment someone guessed. That's why effective data capture matters so much. It's not about speed for its own sake. It's about getting things right at the source and respecting the person on the other side of the form. When data capture works well, everything else becomes easier. Now let's pause here and shift the way we have been thinking about modernization. Up to this point, everything we've talked about has been very real. The complexity of migration, the cost of outdated system, the friction in data capture, and the impact on both people and operations. And all of that leads to an assumption that many organizations quietly accept that modernization has to wait, that meaningful improvement only happens after migration, that users have to live with friction while plans are being drawn, budgets approved, architectures redesigned, and systems rebuilt. But what if that assumption is not actually true? What if modernization doesn't have to be a single delayed event at the end of a long roadmap? What if it could be now, without disruption, without risk, and without forcing the organization to move faster than it safely can? This slide is really the answer to that question we've been circling around. Because when modernization feels delayed, it's usually not because organizations don't want to improve things. It's because there's an assumption that everything underneath has to change before anything improves for the users. What we are seeing here is something different. You can move the experience layer first and allow the deeper platform and system migration to continue carefully on its own timeline. And the way we do that is through voice forms, through DARIAN. DARIAN is 4 points form intelligence layer that turns existing forms into guided conversational experiences without replacing systems or redesigning documents. It works with the forms you already have, the ones that are approved in production and trusted, and changes how people interact with them, not what the form is. That's what voice form make possible, and that's what Darien makes possible. They give organizations a way to improve how people interact with forms without having to modernize everything underneath at the same time. What that looks like in practice is fairly straightforward. Instead of waiting for a full redesign or brand new platform, you start with what you already have. The forms that are already approved, in production, and already trusted by your organization. And you layer a modern interaction on top of them. So the work isn't about rebuilding every form from scratch. The work is about improving how people complete the form. That's where the delay disappears. Now, when people hear AI, this is often where a concern creeps in because AI usually sounds like new architecture, new tooling, new governance, and new integrations. But what makes Darien different is that it doesn't ask you to recreate your logic somewhere else. It reads what is already there, your existing form structure, your rules, your validations, your help text. All of that becomes instruction set for Darien. The form itself becomes the source of truth. And that dramatically reduces the amount of extra infrastructure work organizations usually associate with AI initiatives. There is no new prompting model for teams to learn, no parallel rules set to maintain, no extra workflow just to make AI work. The intelligence is already embedded in your form. Darien simply brings it forward into the interaction. Another concern that naturally comes up at this point is stability. If we improve the front end, do we risk breaking what happens behind it? With Darien, the intent is very much the opposite. Your existing processing model stays intact, your output requirements stay intact, and the same compliant PDFs your processes rely on today are still produced. That's especially important in regulated environments where document of record matters. So, what changes isn't the approved artifact. What changes is the quality, completeness, and ease of getting to that artifact. And that brings us to a bigger picture. Migration is still important. It reduces technical debt, improves long term maintainability, and sets organizations up for the future. But migration also takes time. Budgeting, planning, architecture, development, testing, rollout, all done carefully because the risk is real. Instead of forcing everything into a rush timeline, Darien acts as a bridge. It allows the user experience to move forward now while the system roadmap continues safely in parallel. And that's what modernization without migration actually looks like when you put it into practice. Now let's explore what exactly is Darien and why does it let organizations move forward without waiting. The simplest way to understand Darien is this. Darien is not a new form system. It is not a replacement platform. And it is not something that sits outside your existing processes. Darien is a form intelligence layer that works with what you already have. The first thing Darien understands is the structure of your form itself. Every form already contains intelligence, even if it doesn't feel that way to the users. It knows which fields are required, which answers trigger additional questions, what validations apply, what order information needs to be collected. All that logic already exists today, embedded in your XDPs, PDFs, or AM forms. The challenge isn't that the logic is missing. The challenge is that it is logged inside a layout. Darian's role is to read and interpret that existing structure rather than asking someone to rebuild it somewhere else. That is a critical distinction for modernization without migration, because instead of extracting logic, rewriting rules, and duplicating validations in a new system, Darian uses the form itself as the source of truth. That means no reauthoring logic, no parallel rule sets, no risk of drift between the old and the new. And this is how you modernize how form behaves without touching what the form is. The second block is where users feel the difference. Instead of asking people to navigate fields, labels, and instructions, Darien turns the form into a guided interaction. The form asks questions in a natural sequence. Users respond in plain language by typing or by speaking. And Darien maps those answers back to the correct fields behind the scene. What's important here is that the user doesn't need to understand the form structure at all. They don't need to know which field comes next, what a technical label means, how conditional logic works. They simply provide information the way people naturally do. This is where modernization happens without delay because you are not redesigning screens or rebuilding UIs. You are changing the interaction model. And that interaction model can be added immediately, even while backend systems remain exactly as they are. The third block is especially important in regulated and enterprise environments. One of the biggest concerns organizations have when they hear AI is what happens to compliance? What happens to the official record? With Darien, the output does not change. The same compliant PDF your organization relies on today are still produced. The same document of record is still generated. The same downstream processes continue to function as they always have. What changes is not the artifact. Again, it's the path to that artifact that changes. Instead of users struggling to complete the form correctly, Darien improves the quality and completeness of the data that goes into it. That's why Darien fits into environments where forms are legally approved, outputs are audited, documents must remain consistent. It respects governance rather than bypassing it. And that's what makes modernization possible without introducing risk. Now, the fourth block represents something that's easy to overlook but incredibly powerful: precision at the point of capture. DARIAN doesn't just collect information, it actively helps ensure that information is complete, valid, and consistent as it's being entered. That means validations happen immediately, required information is not missed, formats are enforced without friction, ambiguity is resolved before submission. This is where organizations start to see real operational impact. And all of that happens without changing downstream system at all. So, when we talk about modernization without migration, this is what we mean in practical terms. You're not waiting for a future platform to deliver better outcomes. You are improving accuracy, clarity, and confidence right now at the moment where it matters most. So, now that we understand what DARIN is, and just as importantly, what it is not, the next question is a very practical one. What does this actually feel like for the person on the other side of the form? Because modernization without migration isn't something users experience as architecture or logic. They experience it in small, very real moments when they sit down to complete a form and try to move forward. So instead of taking or talking about this any further in theory, I want to bring it down to a very ground level. I'm going to walk you through two journeys. It'll be the same person, the same form, the same system. Nothing has been migrated, nothing has been rebuilt. Only difference is whether DARIAN is there or not. And as I tell you these two stories, I want you to focus less on what changes technically and more on what changes for the person who's using it. Because that's where real modernization without migration gets real. Meet Alex. Alex needs to complete a form. It could be for a government service, an application, or an internal process, nothing unusual. Alex opens the organization's portal and finds the form. It's the official form. It's familiar, but it's also long. But Alex starts filling it out, and the first few fields are straightforward. And then Alex hits a section that isn't quite clear. The wording feels internal, like it was written for a system, not for a person. So Alex pauses, scrolls up, he looks for instructions, finds a block of text that doesn't quite answer the question. So Alex opens another tab, searches for help. Eventually, Alex makes a reasonable guess and keeps going. Now let's connect this scenario to scale and cost. Alex finishes the form and submits it regardless of what happened and how the experience was. He was not completely confident, but hopeful. Now multiply that moment by thousands of people. Even at a 1% error rate, that dozens of submissions every month that needs a follow up. A few days later, Alex gets an email, something's missing. A field was interpreted differently than expected. No surprises. Alex needs to clarify or resubmit that part of the form. He's obviously frustrated. The organization is also frustrated. So, support teams step in, processing slows. Again, in this scenario, nothing is broken. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. The form worked. The experience created friction. That was the issue for Alex and for the organization. And this is where most modernization conversations stop because fixing this usually means migrating systems. Now, imagine Alex going through the exact same process without changing the system underneath, but with Darian. Alex opens the same portal, the same form is there, the same rules apply. Nothing has been migrated. But at this time, instead of facing a wall of fields, Alex is guided through a conversation. The system begins by speaking, asking questions out loud, one at a time, in clear, plain language. These are the same questions the form was always asking, but this time it is delivered in a way that feels much more natural to Alex. So he responds by speaking the way you would answer another person, sometimes with a full sentence, sometimes with a short answer. And when it's more convenient, Alex can still type, but voice is the primary way the interaction unfolds in this case. When something isn't clear, explanation comes immediately, in context, spoken back as a part of a conversation. If a response needs more detail, the system asks for it right away. Required information is not missed. Formats are validated as Alex goes without breaking the flow of the conversation. That moment where Alex would have stopped, hesitated, and guessed, well, that never happens. And that's how you avoid the 50 errors a month that quietly cost thousands in rework. When Alex finishes, the form is submitted with confidence. Behind the scenes, nothing has changed. The same compliant PDF is generated, the same downstream system received it, the same processes continue. But at this time, data is complete, accurate, ready to flow. Alex's experience also feels modern. The system itself is not new. No migration was required. The organization didn't wait years to improve the experience. It improved how people interact with what already exists. And that's the power of DARIAN. Not replacing systems, not forcing migrations, but modernizing the experience immediately while everything underneath stays intact. So let's take a quick pause for a moment and reflect on what you just heard. Because those two stories, they weren't about different systems. They weren't about different forms. They weren't about different organizations. They were the same person, the same form, and the same underlying system. The difference wasn't technical complexity. The difference wasn't migration. The difference was how experience was delivered. In the first story, nothing was technically wrong. The form worked, the system worked. The process did what it was designed to do. but experience introduced uncertainty, and that created errors, rework, and friction. In the second story, nothing underneath changed. The form logic stayed the same, the compliance requirements stayed the same, the output requirements stayed the same. What changed was the interaction. The form stopped asking people to interpret it, and it started guiding them through it. And that's the key distinction. This isn't about replacing systems, it isn't about accelerating migration, and it isn't about introducing risk. It is about recognizing that experience can move forward independently of infrastructure. DARIAN doesn't compete with your migration roadmap, it simply complements it. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with something very simple. Everything you've heard today, the challenges, the stories, the outcomes, doesn't require a big leap or a risky decision to explore. Getting started with DARIAN is intentionally designed to be low risk, practical, and incremental. That's why the first step we recommend is proof of concept, not a full rollout, not a platform replacement, and not a commitment to migrate anything before you're ready. As proof of concept is simply a way you can take one or two forms that you have, and ideally the ones that create most friction, and experience what modernization looks like without changing the system underneath. It lets you see how voice forms work with your real content, real rules, and real compliance requirements. It also gives your team a chance to evaluate experience, the data quality, and operational impact. And if and when you are ready to scale, we also have flexible options available, and uh, to expanding to more forms, to enterprise licensing, aligned to how and when your organization wants to move forward. And if you want to learn more about the product at your own pace, please feel free to visit our website at www.4point.com for any additional details and product information. With that, we just have a minute left, but I'll try and take the questions we have. So the first question is this a 4-point AI or does it leverage external AI models? So this is not a 4-point AI. It's built to work on your LLM model that is approved by your organization. It's a form intelligence layer that sits above your models that you have in your organization at the moment. I'll be quick just so that we can get through all the questions. How does this approach fit alongside an organization's existing migration or modernization roadmap? So it can run in parallel. DARIAN runs in parallel to your existing roadmaps, and it actually complements it. What it works on is your existing form template because it treats that as a source of truth. So this is what it needs to function and provide you with that experience, and that's why the modernization and migration journey that your organization is, you don't have to worry about it. DARIAN complements it, and it can run in parallel to what you have. Another one, in what ways does DARIAN make form completion more accessible and inclusive? So DARIAN makes accessible your form and form experience accessible in multiple ways. First, it helps user identify where the error is and gives more context about the error. And secondly, if you are stuck somewhere and user is stuck somewhere, it gives them more context about the information that is required as an input. You can simply ask it what is required, and you can get the clarification. Another thing is it gives you a voice as a feature. So it's not limiting users to just stick to the keyboard, which makes it accessible on so many levels. And there is another one. Yeah. Oh, of course. It's multilingual. It's multilingual, and you can actually talk to Darian in your language. All you have to do is again ask. So we can talk more about it. If you're interested, please contact us. But it has been pleasure to have you all. Thank you so much.